All right, and welcome to the Students of S.H.I.E.L.D. podcast. I'm Mike, sitting alongside
Ginger Dan
and Nelson Richards.
And we went to Ollie's. If you've been following along with happenings and comic book sales, they've had a shit ton of stuff on sale recently.
Mm-hmm.
And we went there and we saw this book called The Mystery Play by Grant Morrison and John J. Muth. And we decided to, hey, it is $3. We like Grant Morrison. Let's give this thing a shot. And we bought it, and we all read it, and we're going to do a review of it today. And this is a Vertigo book. I guess given some context here for what exactly this is, because this is not a superhero book. This is a OGN from Vertigo that Grant Morrison wrote in 1994. So Grant Morrison by 94 he's done some stuff. Like, he's done some pretty seminal work from his catalog. He hasn't done the Invisibles yet. He's going to be doing the Invisibles in a few months at this time in 94 when this is released. But he has written Arkham Asylum. He did that in 89. That's what got it really big. He's just finishing up all of his 2000 AD work right now. And he has written Animal Man, and he has written his Doom Patrol. So this kind of fits right in the middle. Almost, it's kind of lost with all the stuff because he is right about to start the Invisibles. So to kind of give context where Morrison is at in his career at this point, and I'm going to throw this to Ginger Dan. What's this book about?
So, as the title's name is The Mystery Play. It does indeed. The plot revolves around a play. So there's this small town somewhere in England, I believe, and they're...
By the way, this takes place present day.
Yes, it is contemporaneous with when it was written.
So 94.
And so, small town in England, nothing really happens there, and I guess they're in a bit of a recession. So the mayor, for whatever reason, decides to get the theater going. So the church puts on a ton of plays. So there's a play, and God is in it.
Yeah, the plays are based off of biblical stories.
The Book of Genesis, I believe.
Yes, and towards the end they go to a different one. But so the play, I think it's like Nelson said, Genesis, Adam and Eve are like being created. God is talking with Lucifer and some other devil. And it cuts to Adam and Eve, and then they're like, God. And he doesn't come out on stage, and like, God, are you there? And they find him backstage murdered. And that's the setup for the book. And it should be noted, as Mike said, this is an OGN.
It is
very
really
short.
thin. I don't think it's more than 100 pages.
I don't even think it breaks that. I believe the page count was 76 when I looked it up.
Okay.
Sounds about right.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's not more than 90 even. So
No, definitely not.
This took me only about 40 minutes to read.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
But so from God dying, Detective Sergeant Carpenter comes in to investigate along with the police from this small town. There's a reporter that also plays a decent amount of action in the plot.
She's kind of the main character by the end of it.
She is. It starts off being a detective, and then
we will be getting into spoilers there.
Well, spoilers are, let's just say, going to start now.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I guess before that, we liked it. If you can find it really cheap, pick it up. But yeah, we're going to get into spoilers.
Oh yeah.
All right. So delving more into the plot, Detective Inspector Carpenter, or Detective Sergeant Carpenter. Sorry, I don't know. They're weird. I don't know why it's Detective Sergeant. I was like really. I'll get to it later. But so he interviews the main suspect in the killing of God, the devil.
Yeah, the guy who
played the devil, and has a very, very great interview scene.
Well, before we get into that, because I think Nelson, and I think that was his favorite part of the book.
Yeah,
I think.
I was we were gonna.
Yeah, but I guess we'll talk segue really fast and talk about the art. John J. Muth's art is photorealistic watercolor.
Mm-hmm.
And
it's real good.
It's really, really good. To me, it very much looks like 90s Vertigo.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
I don't know if you guys have read a lot of 90s Vertigo, but it's in line with the things that I've read.
Yeah.
I don't know if he's the best person for this book, but damn does he make it look good. because you can see how wild and expressive he gets in the interview sequence, which Nelson will talk about. But overall, I mean, he creates like this dark kind of unsettling nature. I kind of got like a little bit of a Silent Hill vibe from it because it seems like there's always this fog lingering in the air.
I think it kind of works for the story.
Yeah, it almost gives a dream-like tone throughout the entire book.
Kind of clouds everything.
Kind of clouds everything. When we transition into that interview, as I'll get to in a bit, it goes from a normal dream to a nightmare. It would feel.
I want to say that when I said, well, might be not be the rest, I was reading some reviews and apparently some people were critical of Booth's artwork, but I'm fine with it personally.
I think it's fine.
I think it works for the story.
I think sometimes photorealistic's a little weird, but I think that of photorealism in general.
It's not very often I see watercolors. The last time thinking off the top of my head that I've seen watercolor photorealism, and the guy who did the watercolors isn't even a photorealistic artist, it was Jim Lee doing the watercolor flashbacks in Batman Hush. It kind of reminds me of that, but obviously Jim Lee is not photorealistic. It's just Jim Lee art, but watercolor. But it looks really good. But this looks better than that. But I like it. I don't know. I kind of got like I said, I got a little bit of a Silent Hill vibe. There's kind of like an X-Files kind of vibe there to it. But I think that's just because of the '90s fashion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you definitely from the artwork get this sense that something like paranormal's happening, even though there's nothing paranormal really in this book. Like maybe like some small things towards the end, but we'll talk about those when we get there.
Mm-hmm.
So Nelson, you want to talk about the interrogation scene?
I want to talk about the interrogation scene, but to sort of build into that, I want to talk about a couple of moments featuring our friend, the detective sergeant.
I don't know about that.
So in the very beginning or I shouldn't say the very beginning, but in the beginning moments of the story, very soon after we meet the detective sergeant, there's a scene where the reporter, whose name I'm actually forgetting at the moment, she comes.
Annie, I think.
Is it?
I could be wrong. I'll look for it. You keep talking.
So the reporter comes across the detective sergeant in, I think, a hotel lobby as he's reading the paper.
Yes.
And it turns out he's actually doing a crossword, and they have a short exchange before he gets up and leaves.
Right.
When the reporter picks up the newspaper to look at the crossword, she finds that the entire crossword has been filled in, but with nothing but nonsense.
Yeah.
Which originally I took to be he was purposely not doing the crossword. He was using this to purposely investigate the reporter. I almost felt that he was kind of being the savvy detective. As we get into more and more interrogation scene, or as we build into the interrogation scene, anytime the detective has an exchange with anybody, again, all of the artwork is giving this fog behind everything, which I think was almost kind of an artistic cop-out, because when you're coating everything in fog, the rest of the environment doesn't have to be as detailed. Doesn't take anything away from the artwork at all. I think it actually enhanced it a bit. And
like I said, I like the fog.
It didn't feel out of place ever, even though the fog was present in almost every indoor scene as well. But this fog is very bright and it's very white. As he goes in to interrogate the man who played the devil, very soon that fog shifts from white to a deep orange. And from the detective's perspective, the man in question who's playing Lucifer turns into the devil himself. So this doesn't become an interrogation, it becomes a confrontation with the devil. And the art immediately reflects that as a confrontation where this mortal man is at a severe disadvantage from Lucifer, shown by a panel very soon after this transformation where the detective becomes visibly small in his chair. His head doesn't even reach the back of the chair that he's sitting in. He becomes so small.
And I just want to also point in, along with him looking smaller, his own word bubbles and lettering becomes much smaller. And
yep.
I didn't pick up on that.
Did he?
I think so. Yeah, Todd Klein did letters, and there's one guy I love. It's Todd Klein. His
Want to
letters
give
are
us
great.
a minute on Todd Klein then?
All right, so very quick thing. If you don't know who Todd Klein is, he's an amazing comic
He's a man
book
named Todd
letterer.
Klein.
I want to say he has the most Eisners of any person. And
I think that's true, actually.
all for letters.
Wow.
And by God, does he deserve it. In this specifically, during the play, God, the devil, and other people get this kind of script-like lettering and like font. And it just kind of gives you this sense of, religion in a way, or that they are different from regular people. And then occasionally, like we just mentioned, people's words get smaller, which is a normal thing to do, but like the bubbles get smaller, the text, like the font gets smaller, and it's just the little things that just really impact the story a lot. And that'll be all from my side on Todd Klein.
So as he's having this this imposing confrontation with the devil, he becomes visibly shaken, and as he's forced to end the interview without, as we find out, after he sort of snaps out of this hallucination, we find from the perspective of the man who played the devil that the detective sergeant never actually asked him anything. He just, all of this was happening in his head, and he runs outside of the police station and collapses. As Dan said, this adds to the notion that something paranormal is happening. He's having this very frightening conversation.
Yeah.
So from our perspective that is the detective sergeant's, we see this to be the truth, that he's actually having this confrontation with the devil, which, again, doesn't seem out of place because of everything having this dreamlike tone. As we'll find out, this is not the case.
And I would like to say the conversation that he has with the devil, it's rather one-sided, the devil talking a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And the devil's main point is that he thinks you have to impose order on everything. And one of the things he says is a lot of art people will say that a statue is just waiting to come out of the stone. I think the artist imposes their will on the stone. And that's more or less the basis of his whole talk with the inspector.
Mm-hmm.
Beyond that, a little bit beforehand, you see an autopsy, and the detective sergeant Carpenter talks about how he doesn't like doctors sometimes because he thinks they view people and medicine as a collection of bits instead of a whole, and that becomes a recurring theme for him. He mentions it to a lot of people, including Annie Wolf, the reporter, later on, that he likes to be able, the way he wants to reconstruct something is get all of the pieces first and then be able to look at it from far away and see the whole thing.
Yeah, every detail in relation with every other detail, not
and
just as their
very
individual parts.
Unsettling panel on the bottom of one page where the coroner starts digging his scalpel.
Yes.
Yeah,
in.
very photorealistic close-up
Yeah.
of skin.
Yeah. It's clearly a photo of like an arm or something.
Mm-hmm.
And
I
he
think
just started
it's his
painting it.
neck.
Yeah,
think
but
it's
it looks
supposed
like
to
he
be
just
the
like
neck.
took a picture of his arm or something,
Right.
and it just started painting all over it. Like, it's just so creepy and unsettling.
Oh, yeah.
Which again is something I think we're meant to be seeing from the detective
Yeah.
sergeant's perspective. He's focusing on this detail, and so are we. He's made unsettled by it, and so are we.
Well, as we discussed, this town is not the best in the world.
It's not. No.
We got a mayor who's a little bit of a diddler.
The mayor's been accused of having, is it just an affair or just having relations in general with someone?
I think it's an affair.
And they might have been underage at the time for part of the affair.
Yeah, well, yeah.
And then I believe
But he also has another problem. As our good friend, the sergeant detective, investigates.
Yes, he tails the mayor to a brothel
for lack of a better word.
for special interests. we'll say.
To an F shack, if you will.
He follows the mayor and peers into the room that the mayor has gone into to find the mayor having sexual relations with a mannequin.
Yeah.
And saying things that are very unsettling. One of the more unsettling points of the book. I don't have the page open exactly. I'm flipping.
I
forward.
do. I'm staring at it.
It's very graphic. The
We'll
one.
say he treats her nicely. He goes down on her first.
One point I wanted to make, you brought up the town in general and how it's not the nicest town. So while this is a continuous graphic novel, it's not broken up at all.
No, it's an OGN.
It's an OGN. It's very much, there are sort of these bullet points, these almost, I want to say bookends to parts of the book where we see panels showing the town just as it is, as normal people going out there, going about their days, with text bubbles not ascribed to anyone in the shop necessarily, but that we're led to believe are from just the townspeople in general as they're having conversations about the goings on in the town and how everyone's becoming unsettled and everyone's feeling less and less safe because of these murders. And I think that was a very good choice in terms of breaking up these plot segments. However, it did not help the pacing very much, in my opinion.
Yeah, I don't. Well, here's the thing. I don't think the pacing of this book
nowhere.
works very well.
I think the pacing of the book works until about 2/3 of the way through, and it feels like from that point on, it almost feels like
They rushed it.
They rushed it because of publication deadlines. It feels like
limitations on page
or
numbers,
limitations on
maybe.
page count. I'm not super familiar with the process of editing and publishing, but I can tell that the final act of this mystery comes on very suddenly.
Very suddenly and goes
for
really fast.
a little murder mystery that was sprinkling in these moments of
It's like that moves really methodically. And
it moves
slow.
very methodically, very deliberately. Morrison is putting in these details about the detective sergeant to sort of hint at his insanity, but it's only eliciting doubt in the character. And I believe the point in the story is when the body of a policeman is discovered. In the middle of the woods by by a dog and his owner just walking through a field. And from then on, everything, like I think within the next 10 pages or so, we find the big reveal that the man posing as Detective Sergeant Carpenter is actually an escaped asylum patient who, was it raped and murdered?
Raped and murdered
An 8-year-old girl.
In the town, which you'd think people would remember what he looked like, but I guess
You'd think, but I mean, it could have, I don't know how much time had passed since then. It was the reporter didn't even realize it until she read the newspaper herself, so it could have been long enough ago that the town had just honestly forgotten about it.
Very well could be.
But from that point on, the climax of the story comes on a little bit quicker than I would like. The sort of big reveal almost felt like it was given away much too quickly.
Because the second, so the way they kind of build up to this is the reporter, Annie, is in her office or whatever, and her editor, I guess, it was like, yeah, all these people in like this like out of town newspaper coming in to talk about this stuff, can't even break a story, and there's also this whole thing about that loony bin up on the moor and some guy escaped and no one's talking about it. What was the name of your reporter or your detective again? And Annie just goes, Carpenter. It's Carpenter. And immediately, at least for me, I realized, okay, so he's an escaped lunatic. Got it.
Well, she like stares.
Detective.
Well, she goes and looks at microfilm to get the old headline, like to pull out the old headlines.
Yeah.
Like, shout out for a microfilm reference, because I've seen one of those machines before in real life, and just it's staggering how we still use microfilm for some stuff. But she has like the moment in Usual Suspect where the detective looks at the wall and he puts it all together. And the same thing here. It's like, he's insane.
Yeah, but so between you finding out, or the reader finding out that there's been an escaped person from the local asylum, and her finding the actual newspaper article is, I don't know, maybe 15, 20 pages.
If that.
Yeah.
It's not a lot. But
this book is short as it
goes
is.
really fast.
I'd be surprised
But
if it was more than that.
It's just it's written in a way that makes you realize immediately, which
It does. It
might
was
not be the
deliberate.
best idea. because it makes sense, but at the same time, you could also say, well, maybe that was the person that murdered it, and this is still just a regular detective. And then you're like,
Right.
well, what's this body in this car in this ditch doing?
And even at the climax, it's the reporter and detective sergeant going to the newest play, which is still being put on despite some protests from the police for safety reasons.
Yeah, and the play is about the crucifixion. There's probably subtext there, but I'm not religious enough to get it.
So they go into the large crowd of people, and the reporter confronts him about this, about the fact that he's the one who murdered this girl.
And she had known and told him that she knew before this. And he asked her, just let me finish this. I know if I can figure this out and piece everything together, I'll be okay. But if I go back now, I'm never going to get better. And you feel bad for this man.
Yeah, and I almost had a little bit of doubt in my mind that he was responsible from some of the vague wording between the two of them, that maybe Detective Sergeant was right. Maybe he was not actually the killer. I don't know. I think that's part of why the climax might have worked a little bit better for me, is that I had these doubts still. But I think that's more of a reaction from the climax coming on so quickly that as a reader reading this in one sitting, I hadn't processed all of this information yet. It was just, it was kind of all thrown at us, and then the climax is happening, and he's being confronted about this. So the fact that it was feeling all so rushed gave that sense of urgency that maybe there's still some innocence to the detective, but that is not the case. I find it very, very interesting, the choice to play out this climactic scene as the detective sergeant being crucified himself. Now we know that this is not actually the case because of the font change as soon as Annie publicly confronts him. She shouts out, "It's him, he killed her." And we see an instant font change. He's alone. He's being dragged to the cross, and he is crucified. But the font changes back, and Annie is left alone. Only the coat is crucified, and we see him running through the crowd without his coat. So I don't believe he was actually crucified in this case. Because of that font change, and because of the it almost seemed that everything was that dreamlike fog was overtaking more and more of the details of the crowd. Maybe that was just an artistic choice because a lot of these panels are larger, but those panels are also not they're not bordered in a with straight lines. They're bordered with these jagged edges like cut up paper. As if these are the fragmented visions of an insane man, not actual events occurring. Which I thought was artistically and as a writing choice, I really enjoyed that. I really enjoy these formatting changes, these artistic and these font changes to show the hallucinations of an insane man. I think that's a very subtle way to introduce this to a reader. But it's a way that, as I was reading through it, these are things that I'm picking up on subconsciously. I only notice them as I go back, but I almost identify that instantly as the font switches, as the format switches. I instantly feel like this is a hallucination, not that these are actual events. And I think that that's an actual great formatting choice, art-wise.
Then how do you explain the code at the end, then?
I don't know. I honestly don't know.
So the coat being crucified is the third to last page, and you have a time skip to 10 years later where Annie, the reporter, has become very successful, written a book.
She's written about this incident.
Yes,
and now the town is doing a play about this incident.
And so she's at lunch or dinner with someone and is like, okay, well, I have to go. This waiter brings out a coat and says, miss, don't forget it. And she looks at him like, what? No, that's not mine. And it's like, it's your coat, see? And she puts it on, and she says, I suppose it is. And it's the coat that was crucified.
It's the coat that he was crucified, yes.
And I also want to note it's right after the autopsy. I don't know if it's the coroner who's talking or the reverend or someone else, but the detective is talking to someone, and they're talking about the coats. And I'm thinking
I
this
think
might
it is.
have to do
I think
with
it is
something.
the doctor performing the autopsy. They're performing the coats, and almost that the doctor makes a comment that the hanging coats make him uncomfortable.
They like scare children and they make him uncomfortable. And Yeats wrote something about, I've seen 15 apparitions, the worst of which was a coat on a coat hanger.
Because
This book is definitely something like the more you read it, the more you see how everything's connected and how it all plays into each other. But
it's weird that a coat is the thematical or the linking.
it's almost
object.
not even a linking object though. Like, yes, it appears in the beginning and at the end, but
I mean,
that's the only
thematically.
times, thematically speaking, yes, but it's the only times it's important. It's very, very weird.
Yeah, that's
Grant
one
Morrison if you
way
ever
I
meet
would
him.
describe this book in general. It's very weird, but it's also very Morrison.
Yes.
I've been reading more and more of his work over time because I read his Batman run and I loved it. It was just weird, but it worked as a Batman run. So I've been trying to read more and more of it. And this, even though it's earlier, way earlier than the stuff of the other books that I've read by him, it's very Morrison, and I'm a big fan of his style.
So one of the things that, at least that I thought, like reading this and then afterwards, is this is kind of a book to show Morrison's opinions on God, but also like there's a lot of conflicting opinions. So I don't know if that's just all the opinions he has, all the ones he came up with, what other ones have.
Knowing Morrison, though, whatever his opinions were in 1994, they're clearly probably different now. In
Yeah.
2018.
But I think one of the more metaphysically heavy sections of this book is when the detective and the
Reverend are playing golf.
Are playing mini golf.
Yes, I loved that sequence, actually.
And just every other panel, the Reverend is giving some sort of, well, God's dead, so...
Yeah, he talks
know,
about only giving these sermons to the people for their benefit. He's already given up on the idea of God.
He says his wife died of cancer like a year before, so he knows God doesn't exist. And he says, like, specifically, if we're all frightened animals, the least I can do is try and calm my fellow brethren. And, like, that's kind of a neat perspective. I think there's a church on the mini golf course, and the detective looks in and says the house is empty. And it's just interesting seeing how, well, we still have this religious institution and these ideas, but no
it's
one
an
really
empty
believes in
house,
them.
right?
So how long has God been dead? And I forget who was brought it up, but someone was saying, well, what if God made humans to kill him because he wanted to feel what we feel or something?
It might have been the Reverend in a different scene. I don't know. I know the sequence you're talking about.
But like his basic idea is, what if God made humans so that they could believe in him and then kill him by not believing in him, so he could feel the mortality that we feel? And that's just a real out there concept that is really makes your head hurt a little bit.
Lofty overtones to this story, which is so weird having them paired against or having them being parallel to this idea of the entire story being told from the perspective of an insane man. I know that a lot of asylums, especially in the past, have been religiously oriented. So I find these interactions between a former patient, an escaped patient, and this reverend who has this disillusioned reverend. I find these interactions to be, on a second reading, to be very interesting, not just as these conversations, but with these lofty overtones.
I mean, why are you just looking at me now? I don't know.
Yeah. Any input, Mike?
I mean, I've watched Talking with Gods with Morrison. He just seems like he's completely out there with whatever he believes. I think he does believe in God, but it's
definitely
different
his
than what
idea of God. It's something he's.
If you haven't seen Walking with Gods, it is really fun to watch. Just kind of, it just picks apart his brain for a little bit.
Which for a guy like Morrison is, I've never seen that, and you've reminded me of the title, so I want to go look at that now. It's something I'm very interested to see Morrison's brain picked apart a bit, because it's one of the weirder ones. It's one of the weirder ones that I've seen as far as comic writers go. He's got some crazy
ideas, as we've seen. And this is, like I said, it's more of a subdued Morrison. He hasn't fully gone out and, well, he's done some crazy shit so far but he's not fully into always crazy shit
I think
yet.
you get glimpses into his crazy inner workings, like Nelson and I were just discussing, with these lofty overtones.
Like I see
like
this
just huge metaphysical.
Like I said, though, he's about to start writing The Invisibles, so he's about to get there.
Right, like I see this, and then I look at some of the books that he wrote in Batman. What was it? 10 years later. 2006.
It's a long run.
It's a long run, and I don't remember. It spans a lot. I don't remember when exactly it starts.
RIP's at least in 2009.
So yeah, this
about 10 to 15 years.
10 to 15 years after this, I can really draw those connections. Like he's coming up with these ideas now, and I can see him kind of laying those seeds in his own work, getting to explore those ideas, those lofty overtones.
Overall, I liked it. It was worth my $3, but
oh, definitely. I don't know. It's I see on the back that there's the Ollie sticker. They say their price $10, our price $3. I think I would have, if I had seen this for $10. I think I would still have picked it up for $10.
I probably wouldn't.
I don't know. I'm a sucker for Morrison.
Well, I'm a sucker for Morrison,
but about half. Cover price, in case anyone was curious, is $13.
Yeah, I don't.
$12.95.
Yeah, I wouldn't pay $12.95 for it.
It's definitely not worth the $21.95 Canadian.
No.
You don't know what they have up in Canada, though. They might not have much better. No offense to anyone living in Canada, I just don't like the French.
I think when I read this, it was made worth it for me by the art more so than the story. The story is very.
Well, the reason I bought this is because you guys, we all decided to do a podcast.
Yeah, no, yeah.
So that was my deciding factor.
I normally shy away from watercolors and for painting as comic art. It's usually kind of odd.
I like it. I don't think you see it enough.
It contrasts a bit too much with speech bubbles, in my opinion.
Yeah, definitely. And I got that.
A little out of place.
The speech bubbles definitely took a bit out of it, even in this story. But with a lot of those speech bubbles, as I mentioned earlier, being those townsfolk conversations that aren't tied to the people, I don't think it detracts so much that I'm taken out of the story.
Yes, I would agree.
But this story, once you get to the end, this story is not one that you won't find anywhere else. This is a story that most things, now again, Morrison gets a little weird with his ideas, but in terms of plot, most of these things you can find in other murder mystery stories, but
the plot is very generic. I think what sets it apart, like you were saying, the art, and also, for the third time that I've said this, the lofty overtones in Morrison's like quote unquote views on God, or at least the views on God expressed by the various townspeople, and to a slightly larger, I guess, still metaphysical sense, the sense of the universe, because like I mentioned earlier, the detective is always like. It's all these little bits, but everything is connected.
All these details working in concert with each other.
And it's very interesting to see that stuff and read it and see how it plays into.
Especially in such a short book that he gets to touch on all of these things.
Yeah.
He touches on a lot of things a little bit, and I like that he touches on all of the things that he does. I'd recommend it. Honestly,
I'd recommend if you can find it for
if you can
less
find
than
it,
cover,
you find it in a sale
ahead.
rack at your LCS. I would say pick it up. I would say even honestly read it online somewhere if you can find it. If you don't feel like paying that annoying price, but since we've been seeing it at Ollie's, maybe you can find it for $3 at Ollie's. In which case, I'd say definitely pick it up. Very good looking book.
I don't think it's a book you can necessarily be disappointed in. Maybe you can just be disappointed in aspects of it, but I think part of it is because it's so short. I think it definitely warrants at least a second read.
Yeah. There's a lot of those larger ideas that get touched on in a short amount of time.
You were the guys that are loving it. I was just had this meh, that was alright kind of feeling.
When I finished that the first time,
it was meh.
I finished it the first time, I felt kind of meh, but getting to explore these ideas a little bit deeper, I think that's kind of selling it a bit more for me, maybe more so than it would normally.
I think the
just because
enjoyment doesn't come from reading the book. I think the enjoyment comes from thinking about what
thinking
the book
about
is.
and talking about the book and the ideas within.
Because I had much more fun talking about it than reading it.
Yeah.
I also was reading it like 2 a.m. So.
Yeah, that's true. I think we've talked about it longer than it took for me to read it.
We're sitting at 34 minutes now, so
yeah, that's
about as long as it took me to read it. We're talking about it.
It's a very quick read.
Yeah, well, Guess we should wrap this up. Maybe give a rating, or we've already recommended, but
I've recommended. I'd say 3 out of 5 stars. Story, maybe 3.5 to 4 for the art. Adding
I think
to that.
the art enough will bring it up for a 3 for me if we're doing a 5 scale today.
if we're doing a sci-fi scale, I definitely rank this at least a 3. And I do think discussing it and just thinking about the concepts brings it to a 4.
I'd say if you're a big Morrison fan, it's worth owning just to see something very deviantly different.
Yeah.
In his collection
Yeah.
of work. It's kind of I guess it's kind of like a cult, maybe a little bit of a cult classic here, kind of a lost piece there, because it is from '94. Like,
I mean,
we looked at it, we were like, "What is this? When did he do this?"
We looked at it, and we were like, Grant Morrison. I mean, I thought it was worth picking up on just seeing Grant Morrison. I'm like, this is weird.
Well, being big fans of Morrison, usually Morrison is my. I mean, I read Happy when it came out because Morrison was writing it, so. And I'm not the biggest fan of Happy. I'd say this is better than Happy. But hey, that managed to be a giant big sci-fi show. This would
And this is definitely easier to digest than most of his work.
Yeah.
I read
There's
Doom,
no multi-dimensional time-traveling god-killing bullet in this.
Yeah, no,
Right.
I read his Doom Patrol, and Jesus Christ, did it really make me think that I was not smart enough to be reading it.
Yeah, these lofty ideas that are in it are very much explicitly stated in these conversations.
And easy to comprehend and think about.
Yeah.
Less so you have to have a PhD in occultism to understand the plot.
Yeah.
Well, I guess that'll be it from us.
Yeah.
Mike's going to finish texting, and then we'll sign off.
Wow, okay. Wow, there's
Behind the
supposed to be
curtains for you.
this aura of professionalism here.
Okay.
Yeah, Nelson and I weren't on our phones. That's professionalism.
At least, did you have a phone go off in a thing before?
I probably did.
Yeah, so don't talk to me about it.
It's the age of phones.
I'm not a comm major. I don't give a shit.
I'm a comm major. I'm busy. It's like
He's
my
busy
phone.
communicating.
This is
He's
my-
putting
busy
his,
on my
putting his degree to
communicating.
use.
Busy with your comm major.
I'm
a
checking to
phrase
see if
I've
my
heard
boss
so much.
emailed me back. That's what I'm doing. All right. That's enough about that. I guess, what do we want to leave them any parting words with?
God's dead.
And people killed him.
Well,
But we don't know who yet.
digest
Nor
that
will
the
we.
next time you listen to a Newsboys or Creed song then. Have a good one. See ya.